Omar Al-Farouq, the powerful Dubai Sheikh, thought his life in America was a perfect blend of wealth and secrecy until Elena Vargas, his mysterious mistress, and Daniel Cruz, his most trusted advisor, turned his luxury home into the stage of a shocking betrayal that ended in murder and a discovery no one could have imagined. Sheikh Omar al-Rashid was a man whose name carried weight in both Dubai and the United States. Born into a family that had built its empire on oil and shipping, he inherited wealth beyond imagination and carried himself with the aura of power that only immense money and influence could create. In his late 50s, he had chosen to spend much of his time in the United States, particularly in a sprawling mansion tucked away in the wealthy neighborhoods of Los Angeles. The property itself was a symbol of his status. Marble floors, towering glass windows, imported chandeliers, and a fleet of luxury cars parked discreetly behind iron gates. To the outside world, he was untouchable, a man whose reach extended across continents. But behind the high walls of his estate, Omar was a man harboring secrets that would eventually bring his empire crashing down. Among those secrets was Elena Vargas, a striking woman nearly half his age who had entered his life under the guise of chance, but soon became his obsession. Elena had grown up in Miami, the daughter of immigrants who had worked tirelessly but never escaped poverty. She had long dreamed of a life far from the struggles of her upbringing, and Omar provided everything she had ever craved: wealth, luxury, and the thrill of forbidden romance. Their relationship was kept away from the public eye, though whispers occasionally traveled through the halls of Omar's circle. For Elena, the affair promised a future secured by Omar's riches. But for Omar, she represented more than indulgence. She became a dangerous distraction from his careful, controlled existence. The mansion was staffed with people who knew better than to ask questions. Among them was Sofia Delgado, the house manager, who noticed the subtle changes in Omar's behavior after Elena appeared. Late-night visits, secretive phone calls, and sudden changes in his schedule were hard to ignore. Sofia was loyal, but she also understood that in a world built on power, loyalties could become dangerous burdens. She kept her observations to herself, never daring to speak about what she saw, even as she quietly feared it might lead to trouble. Omar's world of wealth, however, was not built on stability. Behind the scenes, his financial empire was showing cracks. International deals that once flowed smoothly were now riddled with scrutiny, and authorities were beginning to track money that had been discreetly hidden across jurisdictions. Daniel Cruz, Omar's financial advisor and longtime confidant, carried the burden of keeping everything intact. He knew Omar's secrets in numbers, accounts, and transactions, and he was aware that exposure of even a fraction of it could bring everything crashing down. Yet, Omar's greatest vulnerability was not in offshore accounts or risky business dealings, but in the presence of Elena. He could hide his wealth, but not his desires. Their affair, known only to a select few, was the kind of scandal that could ruin reputations, destroy alliances, and invite enemies to exploit his weakness. To the world outside, Sheikh Omar remained untouchable, the powerful figure who lived like a king in his American palace. But within the walls of his home, the combination of money, secrecy, and desire had created the perfect storm. It was only a matter of time before the cracks widened, and the carefully built illusion of control shattered forever. Elena Vargas had quickly become more than just a mistress hidden away in the shadows of Omar's lavish life. With every passing month, she slipped deeper into his world, moving from a quiet visitor to someone whose presence lingered like a storm cloud in the mansion. Though Omar had sworn secrecy, Elena's ambitions stretched far beyond stolen moments of intimacy. She had tasted wealth, power, and privilege, and once she did, she could not imagine going back to her modest apartment in Miami. She began to test Omar's boundaries, demanding more jewelry, more trips, more influence in his daily life. Her desires seemed endless. And while Omar indulged her at first, the growing list of demands started to grate against the routines he had built to protect his image. Sofia Delgado, the house manager, noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. Elena was no longer entering quietly through side doors but strolling through the main entrance, behaving as though she owned the mansion. Staff whispered nervously among themselves, worried about the consequences if word of her presence leaked outside. Omar, once known for his strict control over every detail of his life, appeared increasingly reckless. Blinded by his attachment to Elena, Sophia's instincts told her trouble was brewing. But as always, she kept her silence, watching events unfold with a careful distance. Daniel Cruz, the financial advisor, was perhaps the most unsettled by Elena's growing influence. He had worked for Omar long enough to recognize when someone posed a risk to the empire. Elena was not discreet, and Daniel suspected she knew more about Omar's wealth than Omar intended. She asked casual questions about accounts, about investments, and about properties. To Daniel, it seemed she was probing, trying to piece together the extent of Omar's fortune. He warned Omar in subtle ways, but his words fell on deaf ears. Omar's pride would not allow him to admit vulnerability, even to someone he trusted with his finances. Elena's hold over Omar was complicated by her own secrets. She had not entered the affair purely by accident. Friends from her past knew she was always drawn to wealthy men, always looking for an escape from her modest background. Some whispered that she had a history of manipulating relationships for financial gain, leaving broken men behind once she had gotten what she wanted. Omar, blinded by desire, and perhaps by the thrill of having someone so much younger, ignored these red flags. For Elena, Omar was not just another man. He was the gateway to a life she believed she deserved, one where she no longer had to chase after stability. But with ambition came recklessness. Elena grew bolder, no longer content with hidden nights and whispered promises. She wanted recognition, to be seen not as a mistress, but as the woman by Omar's side. When he resisted, worried about the scandal it might cause, she grew frustrated. The tension between them escalated in small, sharp moments of raised voice, a suspicious glance, an unspoken threat lingering in the air. What Omar did not realize was that Elena had already started weaving a dangerous web around him. She had begun confiding in people he didn't know, feeding them fragments of his life. Carefully crafted to paint a picture that benefited her, the secrecy that once shielded Omar now became his greatest vulnerability. For Elena, this was no longer about love or passion. It was about power, and she was willing to risk everything to take it. Detective Mark Reynolds stepped into the opulent mansion that morning, his sharp eyes scanning every detail of the crime scene. What should have been a home of luxury and security now carried the chilling silence of violence. Omar Al-Farouq lay lifeless in his master bedroom, the silk sheets stained in a way that clashed with the perfection he had always demanded. His body bore no signs of forced struggle, no evidence of a break-in. And yet, the brutal finality of his death was undeniable. To Mark, the absence of chaos raised more questions than it answered. Someone had walked into this fortress and ended the life of one of Dubai's wealthiest men without disturbing the world outside. Sofia Delgado was the first person questioned. Her nerves were visible, hands shaking as she recounted how she discovered Omar. She insisted she had followed her usual morning routine, unlocking the master suite to deliver breakfast when she stumbled upon the site. Her voice cracked as she described the body, but Mark noticed how carefully she avoided mentioning Elena. When he pressed her, she admitted Elena had been in the house often, but she quickly added that Omar trusted her. It was a cautious choice of words, and Mark tucked it away for later. The mistress herself was nowhere to be found. Elena Vargas had vanished in the hours following Omar's death, leaving behind only traces of her presence. A silk scarf in the living room, a perfume bottle on the dresser, and messages on Omar's phone that spoke of heated arguments in the days before his death. To Mark, it was more than coincidence. A missing mistress, a wealthy man dead in his own bed, and whispers of tension between them. It was the kind of trail detectives rarely ignored. Daniel Cruz, however, painted an even more complex picture. When questioned, he admitted Omar had recently made plans to change parts of his will. Rumors of Elena pressuring him to secure her future financially had reached Daniel, and he had warned Omar against making rash decisions. Whether Omar acted on those thoughts remained unclear, but the timing made the situation suspicious. Daniel's calm/measured answers carried weight, but Mark detected a subtle undercurrent of resentment. Perhaps Daniel had felt undermined by Elena's influence. Perhaps even threatened by her potential inheritance. As investigators combed through the mansion, they found no signs of forced entry. Security cameras, strangely, had been disabled hours before Omar's death. The staff swore they had not touched them, but whoever cut off the surveillance had known exactly what they were doing. For Mark, this shifted the investigation from a possible crime of passion to a carefully calculated murder. Someone close, someone trusted, had orchestrated this. The autopsy results added another twist. Omar had been poisoned. The substance slipped into his drink sometime the night before. It was not a fast-acting poison, but one that allowed its victim to weaken gradually, ensuring he died in bed rather than collapsing suddenly in public. The choice of poison suggested patience, knowledge, and intent. Mark could not ignore how deliberate it all seemed. Every thread pointed back to Elena, but there was no certainty yet. Was she a desperate lover turned dangerous, or merely a convenient scapegoat? The mansion held secrets in every corner, and with a fortune on the line, motives stretched far beyond passion. For Detective Mark Reynolds, it was clear this was only the beginning of a much darker story, one that would soon unravel into betrayal deeper than anyone imagined. The search for Elena Vargas turned into an international chase that consumed investigators for weeks. Detective Mark Reynolds knew she was more than a missing witness. She was the missing piece that could explain everything. The sudden disappearance wasn't the act of a frightened woman. It was deliberate, calculated, and timed perfectly with Omar Al-Farouq's death. The first clue came from airport records, which showed Elena had purchased a ticket to Mexico just days before Omar's murder, but she never boarded the flight. Instead, surveillance footage revealed her leaving the mansion hours after the security cameras had been disabled, carrying a single bag and getting into a black sedan that belonged to a rental company. From there, her trail seemed to vanish. Forensic teams continued combing through the mansion. Hidden in Omar's private office, tucked behind a row of financial ledgers, they discovered a handwritten note. It wasn't signed, but the message was clear. The deal is done. He will never change the will. To Mark, this was a chilling discovery. Omar had indeed been revising his will, and it seemed someone wanted to make sure those changes never took effect. Elena was the obvious suspect, yet the style of the note suggested a colder, more detached hand than hers. It wasn't a lover's scrawl, it was a business message, deliberate and precise. Meanwhile, Sofia Delgado began to unravel under questioning. Her loyalty to Omar's household seemed genuine, but inconsistencies appeared in her testimony. She initially claimed she had no idea where Elena was staying during the final week, yet investigators discovered Sofia had signed off on guest house maintenance orders where Elena had been living. When confronted, Sofia admitted she feared for her job if she spoke too freely. She confessed that Omar and Elena's relationship had grown toxic, filled with fights about money, status, and trust. More importantly, Sofia remembered seeing Daniel Cruz in whispered conversations with Elena late at night in the kitchen, though she never heard the details. The possibility of an alliance between Daniel and Elena suddenly opened new doors. If Daniel stood to lose influence over Omar because of Elena's pressure, aligning with her could have served his ambitions. But the question remained. Was Daniel truly working with her, or against her? Financial records deepened the puzzle. Investigators found a recent transfer of $500,000 from one of Omar's offshore accounts into an account linked to Elena. It was money she could use to disappear, and the transaction had been authorized with Omar's personal codes. Either Omar himself made the transfer willingly, or someone close enough had forced his hand before eliminating him. By the fourth week, a break came from an unexpected place. A hotel in Miami reported a guest under a false name who matched Elena's description. Security footage showed her entering with a man, though the angle never revealed his face. The two stayed only one night before vanishing again, but forensic testing of the room found traces of the same poison used on Omar, hidden in a water bottle left behind. This discovery transformed Elena from a missing mistress to a fugitive linked directly to the murder weapon. For Mark Reynolds, the case was no longer about whether Elena was involved, it was about who she was working with. The smooth disabling of cameras, the hidden notes, the financial manipulation, and her sudden access to poison all suggested a network far larger than a lover scorned. Someone powerful was backing her. And the truth would not only expose Omar as killer, but also reveal betrayals buried deep within his closest circle. The trail of Elena Vargas finally came to a dramatic conclusion after weeks of relentless pursuit. Detective Mark Reynolds had pieced together enough evidence to convince authorities that she wasn't just a mistress caught in scandal, but a central figure in a calculated crime. Yet, even as the net closed around her, the mystery remained incomplete. Omar Al-Farouq's death felt too layered to have been orchestrated by Elena alone. Her movements, her access to poison, and her skill at disappearing all hinted at someone guiding her. Someone with resources and inside knowledge of Omar's household. The breakthrough came from a financial analyst working quietly behind the scenes. He uncovered a hidden account tied not to Elena but to Daniel Cruz. Transfers from Omar's offshore holdings had been funneled through multiple shells before landing in Daniel's name. What made the discovery chilling was the timing large sums had moved out only days before Omar's murder. When compared with Elena's sudden $500,000 payout, the pattern was undeniable. Daniel had used Elena, perhaps even promised her a future together, only to set her up as the fall girl, while he stood to gain everything. Mark moved quickly, bringing Daniel in for questioning. At first, Daniel maintained his calm, playing the role of the loyal advisor devastated by Omar's death. But the evidence mounted against him: the financial records, Sophia's testimony about late-night meeting, and the handwriting analysis linking him to the cryptic note hidden in the office. The mask began to slip. He finally admitted to knowing about Omar's plans to rewrite the will. If Omar had followed through, Daniel would have lost his influence, his privileges, and his wealth. Working with Elena gave him the perfect cover. She had motive, passion, and a dangerous attachment to Omar that made her an easy target for suspicion. Daniel's role had been to orchestrate from the shadows. Yet Daniel underestimated Elena. While she may have followed his lead in the beginning, Elena had kept her own secrets. When she was eventually tracked down in a small coastal town in Belize, she was found living under a new identity, holding documents that directly tied Daniel to the poisoning. Hidden in her bag were vials identical to the ones recovered in Miami, along with a journal that painted a haunting picture of betrayal. In her writings, Elena detailed how Daniel manipulated her into believing Omar would leave everything behind for her. When she realized Daniel's true intentions, she decided to strike back, keeping copies of his financial transfers and threatening to expose him if he abandoned her. The final twist came when investigators revealed that Elena had fled out of fear but out of vengeance. She planned to resurface with proof of Daniel's guilt, forcing him into the same trap she had once fallen into. But her plan collapsed when authorities caught her first, faced with undeniable evidence. Elena broke down and confessed her role in Omar's poisoning, but insisted Daniel had masterminded the plot. The case ended with both Daniel and Elena charged. Daniel faced trial for conspiracy and financial fraud, while Elena was prosecuted for her part in the murder itself. The Dubai Sheikh's death, once thought to be a crime of passion, was unmasked as a chilling blend of greed, betrayal, and manipulation. The luxury mansion in the U.S.A. that once symbolized Omar's power and wealth became instead a haunting reminder of how trust, when placed in the wrong people, can unravel into deadly consequences.